Much. I am Andrea Heuson. I am a professor of finance at the University of Miami. So I am not probably in the same, I know I'm not in the same research ranking, but I'm probably not in the same empirical ranking as Alex with identification strategies and things. I also know that you have been on Zoom for more than an hour already. And when we get into these very focused, very intense discussions, they become much more fatiguing than if you were sitting in a seminar and you could kind of look around and look out the window and that sort of thing. So I will go right ahead and start. I'm going to try to share my screen on my PowerPoint presentation here. And hopefully, let me get up to the top. That's where I thought I had it. And put it into presentation mode. And then hopefully people can see. Are we clear? Somebody wave, Alex, I can see you. So
yeah, so we see it in presentation mode. So we see not only your main thing, but also the preview.
Let me change the display. Is that better?
Still the same.
Still the same.
There it is. That's it.
There it is. Okay. That's the first thing. I'm old. So I am nowhere near as good with a lot of this technology as the people that you saw present today. I was amazed by what Alberto managed to get across on his screens, and even Alex, in a much less formal way, was able to get information across to somebody who is sitting right in front of a screen instead of a back room. And Zoom has changed our lives, and that's one of the things I will touch on today. I am part of this panel probably because I have a longer view than many people that you all will run into in the course of your next couple years in the profession. I graduated in 1982, and I swear to God, I had to walk over to the School of Engineering and get printouts from a printer that closed at 8 o'clock when I started doing research. And if it didn't run, back you went to resubmit it and pick it up the next day. So I really do have a long view, and be glad you're not working with cards anymore. Let me tell you that. From where I sit, this is a world full of increased disruption and increased competition. And I think one of the most important things that I can convey here comes from 10 years experience on a promotion and tenure committee. So we start to see people at the stage where things did not go well with Alex. And we are, as a P&T committee, funneling information from a variety of sources, including outside letters, including department chairs, including sort of off the record conversations with faculty. And what I've tried to do is collect both my experience and the thoughts that I have learned from being on a promotion and tenure committee. And I thought, and I thought, and I thought, and I can't find wise older women anywhere. I wish there were some, but I'm sort of coming at this from either Gandalf, if you are a Lord of the Rings fan, or Dumbledore, if you happen to be a fan of Harry Potter. But the role of these characters in this type of situation is one that I think could have some value. At least I hope that you think so after I go through my little spiel. I have one child. He's not a child anymore. He's 30. But he will tell me all the time that I give way too much advice. So forgive me, I will take my half an hour. And this, kind of is going to turn into advice from the long view, the impact of both disruption and competition. It is hitting every single industry, from Adobe to retailers to Google. Finance, academic finance is an industry. You do not succeed unless you add value. You have to have a positive net present value to the institution that you are working for. And we are in an industry that is being disrupted along with every other. So now, today, after this session, is where you can start to build your reputation and your network, and your interaction with people throughout this conference will give you additional opportunities to build on both your reputation in the profession and your network. There are PhD student resources out there. We have all been there, and we all feel badly now that there are people coming into the job market now. We felt badly in 2007 that there were people coming into the job market in 2007. These crises happen every 10 years or so. So every 10 years, there's a group of PhD students who timing may not be perfect, but we get over it. And there are this seminar and many, many others like it that are geared towards helping PhD students. So take advantage of those. Also, if you happen to meet diversity-based guidelines, for example, FMA has a women's presentation, used to be a breakfast, and we would get 100 women up looking fabulous at 7:30 in the morning to discuss issues relevant to women in a profession that is dominated by men. There are resources for assistant professors. FMA has an assistant professor's breakfast. There are various other diversity-based and targeted initiatives that start out at conferences. Please, please, please take advantage of them. Try to find, a little bit of a silver lining. Conferences are happy to have you come. The best ones, you don't have to deal with travel costs. Registration fees have been discounted. And as you look at what's on these programs, I personally think it is really important to go to at least a couple sessions that are outside your area. Because what you will see, first of all, is different presentation styles, the way people are handling their presentations in this world of Zoom. And you may find some different data sets and things that are out there. I find a lot of the papers that I think, oh my God, I wish I had written that, come from when somebody takes an idea in one area and translates it to make it useful in another one. Because then you already have a background of research in that first area that you can link back to as you apply it into your particular niche. So I know much more now about robo-advising than I did at the start of this. And I'm thinking about how to try to apply the concepts that Alberto mentioned about robo-advising to real estate, which is the area where I work, into the decision by individuals to purchase a home or to select a broker. And I thought of that simply because of this presentation that I saw. So you'll find data sets, you'll find presentation styles, you'll find topics. And something that will start to, sort of sound familiar about some of the things I want to talk about today is if you by some chance went to an MBA program and your MBA program made you go through job preparation, made you go through all of the coaching designed to get you an interview and then a job in corporate finance or in investment finance, a lot of the things that I'm going to suggest you do today go back to that type of career preparation, because now it is not good enough, I don't think, to have spectacular research credentials. There are very, very few schools that are going to be able to afford you with just your spectacular research credentials. So you are going to need to be able to engage people in the field and use those people in the field as mentors and as people who will help you along in your career. So if you go to a really interesting session, either one you know all the papers, you know all the presenters, all the discussants, or one that you know nothing about before the session, write to them, try to engage them in sort of a personalized discussion. And this takes an email. Certainly don't send, I can't tell you how many Dear Professor Andrea emails I get that somebody hasn't even bothered to make sure that in their form program, they have the first name and the last name right. So Alex, I'm sure you've gotten, Dear Professor Alex emails, and that you don't go any farther. So you need to personalize the beginning of the email and just enter into a discussion. What did you like about the paper? What questions? Maybe you didn't want to ask a question in an open forum, but ask it through email. Get a discussion going. If it's a senior person, you know, tell them a little bit about the research that you're working on. Ask them if they think that it sounds interesting. But if you can get them to read beyond that first sentence or two, chances are they're going to answer. And then you're going to start to build a network, much like you would have used alumni from your school if you were searching for a job at the MBA level. So I think you really do have to build a network around these conferences. You can't meet in a bar anymore, or we can't stand around at the end of a session. So you have got to create this. I think presentation skills are going to be much more important. To be able to Zoom absolutely seamlessly. And there are many, many tutorials out there. Lots of financial firms are starting to do their interviewing virtually, their first and second round interviews. And LinkedIn has many, many lists of help on how to succeed at a video interview. And, you know, they're geared for our first year MBA student who is talking into a blank screen and has to impress a recruiter. But the points that they make are very, very good. Your virtual background matters. It says a lot about you. It is the first thing somebody sees before they even look at you. So I changed my background for my audience. And if I want to talk about the University of Miami, I have a beautiful shot of the University of Miami. I think that your background ought to be something that doesn't necessarily draw attention to what's back there. So if the dirty laundry's on the back or something, make sure that you have a virtual background because it's going to be very, very visible. Your slides have to be much more geared towards very close-up view. So that typo in a table or that spacing in a table is going to look a little weird now when it's just in front of you. One of the most depressing things that I had to do when I was a PhD student at the University of Illinois was they came and they videotaped me teaching a class. That was depressing. What was worse was watching it. Oh my God, after the first 2 minutes, I didn't like my clothes, I didn't like my hair, I didn't like anything. But watch the whole thing. And it's amazing what you will learn about what you do, your gestures, tics, those sorts of things. It's really, really useful to record yourself and to watch it. And if you're at a school that has a bunch of PhD students, volunteer to watch each other's videos and give each other feedback. You are all friends. And people behave very differently when they're presenting than when they're sitting around the carols talking. And your school probably has career presentation resources. Maybe they're for grad students, but try to get somebody who is doing that to take a look at your video and critique it. And you want to make sure as you are speaking that you are looking at the camera, not looking someplace else. When you smile, your voice changes and your face changes, and whether or not you're smiling shows through in your voice, and your level of confidence is really crucial, and that is going to come from practice. You can tell that Alberto has given that talk many, many times because of how smoothly he went through it. One of my colleagues who actually went to for advice on what to talk about in this particular consortium, given my topic, is a man named Paul Barochin, who does very, very careful empirical research, but he is a great presenter. And he has teamed with the man in charge of the presentation skills workshop for MBAs here at the University of Miami. And they do a critical thinking and presentation skills workshop for our PhD students. And when I asked him for things that he thought were important to talk about in this consortium, one of the things he said is if any of y'all are interested in being part of this, it's Zoomed, it's recorded, just reach out to him and they do a nice job and they will give you some insight on presentation skills. And I actually teach with Paul. I co-teach the Student Managed Investment Fund. And I can tell you he's a very, very polished presenter, and so is Don Donaldson, the man who does the other part of it. So, you know, free advice is worth something when you can get it for free. This is something that I think you would find useful if you are not comfortable with your presentation skills, or if your school has not invested a lot of resources in helping you do that. I just got this 20 minutes ago, really hot off the presses. It came from a member of my faculty who was friends with somebody on this panel. And so he sent it out to all of us. Leave it to Harvard to do something really creative. This is a week from today, I think. 8 minutes. That shows how condensed our attention span has become. Each speaker has 8 minutes to cover things like parallels to 1999 or systematic versus value-based investing. This is a seminar. There doesn't appear to be any registration fee for this. There was no screening. I've already registered. The link is here, or I'm happy to send it to you. And these are really, really high-powered people. So this will be a great way, if you're interested in any of these topics, to be able to learn something really just for the sake of learning, and to be able to comment when somebody asks you about what's going on in these markets today, you know, to have this as a resource for comments or to frame your own thoughts, I think is really valuable. But I was really, really attracted to this novel format adapted to Zoom, where there are 8 minutes is all the presenters get to talk. And I'm sure that you've seen other things like this. I skim through everything that comes into my email just to see if it sounds interesting. The paper, this was in there before you talked, Alex, I promise. I didn't just add it, but this was in there because this is a great paper, really, really good. And one of the books that they cite, we use for our graduate students, so these toughest interview questions. We will all be interviewing eventually. I can tell you from my side, it's a very sad story. I don't want to make you nervous, but back in the days of hotel interviewing, one of my colleagues and I were on one of those days where you interview 10 people in a suite, and we had the 2 chairs that we were sitting in, and then a coffee table, and sort of to the side was a couch. And the couch was where the people who were being interviewed sat down. And we discovered after about half of our interviews that we liked people who sat close to us, and we didn't like the people who sat far away. Now, what that does after we made that discovery is ruin it for every other interview person, because you came in and if you sat far away, that was like it. You wanted an ejector seat to move you out of the way. And we all start with, tell us about your research. But then there's that 10, 15 minutes where you get other questions. And that's where this book, or there's several others, you know, great toughest interview questions. That's where this book will help you with some of these off the wall questions that you just don't expect. And it's, you know, how to handle when you don't know the answer to a question, or when you have to stop and think, or how to turn a question into something that you put back to the people who are interviewing you. So even on a Zoom interview, you're going to get questions that you may not know the answer to, and you're going to be really up close. So they're going to be able to see your face, to see your reaction. So this book is really, really good at helping you figure out how to handle some of these interview questions that maybe you hadn't expected to get. So what's next? Still things that you can do now. The soft skills. You know, your elevator pitch used to be verbal, as you're walking out of a conference session with somebody, or you find yourself in the elevator with one of these powerhouses in finance. Now it has to be written. It has to be written in a cover email. So you need to find a way to make it very, very persuasive. Same with the cover email for your job market paper. I think abstracts are too long in many cases to convey what's in your job market paper. You ought to be able to convey it in a title and 2 minutes. So the title needs to be pretty cool. It needs to attract somebody's attention. And then maybe the first half of the abstract ought to be able to attract attention, because these abstracts that get into estimation methods and things, people just lose interest before they have a chance to read all of them. Something I think is really, really valuable now is to volunteer. Volunteer to be on a program committee for a conference that has program committees. You'll see at the midpoint of this FMA meeting who the chair of the conference is next year and who's on that program committee. And you will know some names. So write those people that day, volunteer to be on a program committee. And if you are selected, get your reviews in on time. You don't want to be the one who's late and they're waiting for it. Same thing with journal editor reviews. Do a good job. You don't just blow it off, because you don't want to be known as the person that blows it off either. Help your advisor. Your advisor is your first mentor. Ask that advisor if you can help review papers. Ask your advisor to volunteer you to journal editors for topics where your advisor is comfortable. I heard at a board meeting last week that submissions to journals are up 20 to 25% because people have fewer demands on their time. In some cases, they're working from home. They're churning out more research. It's not necessarily better research, but there is much more going into the editorial pipeline. And to have a volunteer editor or have somebody volunteer to an editor, to have a volunteer reviewer is really, really valuable thing to have. So just get your name out there and, get yourself known for things that you feel comfortable as being a professional expert on. Befriend your competitors. There are people out there who have working papers that are competing or are related to yours. I don't think it's a good thing to do to treat them as your enemy or to belittle their work to other people, because that's going to get back to them sooner or later. It's much better to try to make those people allies and to have a stage where you can discuss things, or you can, bounce ideas off of people, even though they may be your competitors. When you are in an industry that is under attack, that is the time to, try to be a little more collegial rather than to try to, draw yourself in and become more defensive. And when you finish grad school, you will become a new colleague, a new professor. Every member of the department should know you, even now. I know half of our PhD students. I don't know the other half. And they should all make an effort so that I know them and I know their specialty. So if somebody asks me about them, I know enough to have a comment on a personal level besides just the research. Develop your internal within your school and your external out in the research world network. Let them know when good things happen, when you get an R&R or when you get an acceptance. Just, keep your name, sort of keep yourself in their inbox. I think this is really crucial when you are first starting out. You're going to get asked to do things, both internally and externally. I don't think that you should say no if you can possibly avoid it, whether it's to serve on a committee, to read over a colleague's paper, to discuss a paper at a conference. Quite frankly, when I was asked to do this doctoral student consortium, I didn't really need to do it, quite honestly. But I haven't done one in a while, and I thought it would be really interesting to see what's going on out there. The last time I did one was when big data was just starting to come into the profession. So I was suddenly confronted with the idea that if you didn't have 2 million observations in your data set, nobody's going to like your paper. So that's how long ago it's been since I've done one of these. So I thought, well, I will do one of these. And I really enjoyed reading all of the papers that I was assigned, being able to rank them, trying to decide which ones I thought had the best possibility for publication, and I learned a lot. I was also then confronted with the idea that, here comes a session. And it is a session, mine is tomorrow afternoon from 3:30 to 5, with 3 completely unrelated papers, 2 of which are nowhere close to my area. So now I have to find a discussant for papers that are not in my particular area. But I had a network. I had people that I could go to where I could say, would you mind discussing this paper? And I asked 2 people in my own department, my friends. One has not answered me yet. You know, eventually maybe he will, but the session is tomorrow. The other one was like, yes, I think this is a nice, you know, I gave him a little background on the paper. I think this is an interesting topic. Then I asked another, you know, friend from conferences, and she was honest. She said, you know, I'm a little out of date, but somebody in my department, somebody else who might be willing to do it. So I asked that person, and he said, well, no, I teach at that time. So then I went back to my first contact and I said, you got anybody else? And she sent me to another contact who said, also, I'm teaching at that time, but I have a colleague. It's much better to say, I'm teaching at that time, but I have a colleague, than it is to say, no, I'm teaching. So if you're going to say no to reviewing a paper or discussing a paper, come up with an alternative. Come up with another suggestion. Volunteer to reach out, you know, connect whoever's asking you with that other person, because that's how you become useful, and that is going to become part of your reputation. You know, volunteer to the big names especially, and to associate editors in your niche area. You may have to ask your advisor to introduce you. Volunteer to association officers. You know, you may say to yourself, oh my God, ASSA, never will they want anything to do with me. You'd be surprised. They have a lot of organizational stuff going on. And if I look at people who take leadership roles or who are nominated for leadership roles in associations, you start out on a committee and you do well, and then the next cycle rolls around, you get to be a committee chair, you're chair of a couple committees, you're reporting to the board. All of a sudden you get slated, nominated to be on the board. I didn't want to put this in writing, but if I am nominated to a position that I want, I campaign, not an email, you know, blanket email to 200 people, but personal emails to people who I think would be willing to vote for me. And I probably write 50 of them. And usually, you know, knock on wood, I get elected to the position that I want. And once you're on the board, then you become part of the nominating slate to be an officer. And this improves your visibility and helps to count for your service. When we get to P&T time, we look for that national visibility. And I would expect every school does that. My last comments have to come from teaching. Teaching is where I think the most disruption from technology and the virus combined is coming, because you really can't separate those. I think I have 5 minutes left, and I didn't want to put any of this in writing. We can all be replaced now fairly easily by some really, really good professors who have got online teaching down. Big schools that spend big on excellent teachers have been able to use this crisis and the move towards virtual learning in a way that smaller schools, in schools that do not necessarily have people where teaching is their most important object in their objective function, fall short. So there's a man named Scott Galloway, who's a marketing professor. He's an adjunct at NYU, but he really is a frustrated finance professor. He has done several talks, and he's very interesting to hear. He thinks that in 5 years, 25% of the universities in the country, public and private, are going to be gone between budget constraints and lack of students. That's going to collapse the market out there for all of us. And teaching, I think, will become more important. And I know it's hard. I'm giving an exam tomorrow. So all these dings you hear are people with last minute questions. It's really hard sometimes when you want to work on research and you want to, you know, get comments and you want to get a paper done and you want to get a revision done. but try not to see students as a burden. They can tell. You'll see it in your evaluations, and your evaluations happen when you don't have control anymore. So in any sort of a position where you are teaching, teaching is going to count at the margin. And you want to make sure that that's a box that you tick off, that you are doing a good job in the classroom. Because if not, there's going to be somebody out there who is doing well in research, but is also doing well in teaching, and that person is going to be much more attractive. So I think the days where we can say, 80% of your career is going to be based on your research and only 20% on teaching are over, or will soon be over. And I personally think that it'll probably be at the research intense universities, maybe 65% research, but that 35% on teaching, or 30% on teaching and 5% on service, is where that shift is going to happen. And it won't happen overnight, but I do think that you need to start to see your students as not a burden, but just one more skill that you are going to add to your portfolio that is going to make you valuable to a place you want to stay. I see Alex is still online. You talked about your first job. I came to the University of Miami straight out of grad school, and I haven't left. But when I was in grad school all those years ago, a lot of people followed the strategy of going someplace first to build a research pipeline, even if you didn't want to stay there. And then, stay 2, 3, 4 years, build your research pipeline, and then try to go to someplace you really wanted to go. And we spent hours discussing this in David Kinley Hall at U of I. Alex, now these days, do you think that that's still a decision people make, or should they go, where they want to go first, or should they try to go where they want to stay long term when they first get out?
So my opinion is that people should comport themselves in their first job so as to maximize their choice set for where they're going to be 10 years out. Maybe they want to stay where they start, maybe not, but oftentimes we don't get the choice of staying where we start, even if you are doing all the right things and working hard. So my advice to students is typically, work so that you can have better choices down the road.
That makes sense. With that,